All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Give me a second while I chew my mint up here that I had in my mouth. I forgot there's not a song or a prayer or something to start this thing, so I don't want to be talking like this the whole time. All right, you should have received a puzzle piece, and if you didn't raise your hand. Did I have enough, Jansen? Was there enough? You don't have any more. Okay, well, never mind. Don't raise your hand. All right, oh, somebody has two? Oh, you ran out, but they didn't. All right, so there is some there. All right, so anybody need one? Raise your hand up here, over here. And I understand it was hard to get everybody covered when everybody's kind of coming in like that. But this puzzle piece really has nothing at all to do with the lesson. It's just to mess with your mind the whole time, trying to figure out what's he going to do with this. And then I'm going to get to the end of the lesson, and it's not going to. No, it will make sense when we get to the end, but not until we get toward the end. 1 Corinthians 12. 1 Corinthians 12. It was several years ago that a scientist was giving a lecture before the Chicago Medical Association, and the topic of his lecture was the worthlessness of the human body from a scientific standpoint. And what he found in his studies was that for a person, and Jansen, do you have one of those left? If you'll give me one, so it'll kind of remind me to, that way I can put it here in front of me. Oh, you got one more too? You got one there? That was a great choice, by the way, that you gave me, because that'll come in handy. For an average 150-pound human body, it contains enough lime to whitewash a fair-sized chicken coop, enough salt to fill a small shaker, enough iron to form a 10-penny nail, one, and a lot of water. And he priced those ingredients, now this was back in the 60s, but he priced those ingredients at 98 cents. And the lesson from that lecture is that when you separate the human body into its individual components, it's almost worthless, less than $1. Now okay, so inflation, now it's worth $50, right? With inflation. Maybe three. But even more importantly, when you divide the body into those pieces, it's no longer able to function. It doesn't suit its purpose. While on the other hand, a healthy, functioning body is a priceless commodity. And similar truths are communicated here in the body language that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Here the Apostle Paul uses a very simple analogy. He mixes in a rather healthy dose of imagination to teach the Corinthians and us some vital principles about what it takes to be a vibrant church. Oh, let me back up here. We're not quite there yet. Corinth, and we'll deal with this kind of as a class. So just tell me the church at Corinth. Lots of problems, okay? Lots of problems. Discord, dysfunction. The church in Corinth had members. They were carnal and they immature and they were selfish. They were proud. They were divisive, and nowhere did that manifest itself any more than when it came to spiritual gifts. And so skillfully, Paul employs a message that even the most immature of Christian could understand. And that is the unity that exists between a diverse human body and the essential parallel to the spiritual body, the church. Now, this is imagery that would have resonated extremely well in Corinth, because Corinth was home to the temple of Asclepius. He was the Greek god of healing. And over the centuries, excavations have unearthed a large number of terracotta votive offerings that represented the ailing parts that Asclepius was credited with healing. And so, especially in Corinth, when Paul talks about if everyone was an ear, well, they know what just an ear looks like. This was a part of their culture, their upbringing. And as he wraps up his analogy here at the end of chapter 12, he looks to emphasize the fact that while there are many parts in the body, none of them are exclusive. That in the vibrant church, there is a place for everyone. Look at chapter 12. Let's begin our reading in verse 27. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 27. Now you are Christ's body and individually members of it. And he is appointed in the church, first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, helps, administrations, various kinds of tongues. All are not apostles, are they? All are not prophets, are they? All are not teachers, are they? All are not workers of miracles, are they? All do not have gifts of healing, do they? All do not speak with tongues, do they? All do not interpret, do they? But earnestly desire the greater gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. Now, before we get to the text itself, let's take a quick detour. Because Paul here describes a number of things that would be classified as miraculous gifts. Things like prophecy and miracles, like healings and tongues. And there are some reasons why these gifts are no longer in existence among the people of God today. And one of those reasons is that the New Testament teaches us that they would cease. Paul at the beginning has taught at length at the beginning of chapter 12, and he will come back to it in chapter 14. And his main point in those sections is going to be unity among all believers, that they were not to despise one another simply because they had been given different gifts. Now, I'm an astute student of the Bible, and so I know that between chapter 12 and chapter 14 is chapter 13. It's the most familiar chapter in the entire book, right? And in that chapter, Paul tells the Corinthians that unless their gifts are exercised with love, they're profitless. But within that text, he also says there are certain gifts that will pass away, but love will always remain. So in verse 8 of chapter 13, he says love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. The miraculous gifts belong to a time of partial revelation. But when the fullness of that revelation came along, those miraculous gifts would no longer be necessary. Secondly, the way of imparting those gifts is no longer here. The apostles received their power directly from the Holy Spirit himself. That is, there was nothing that was done to them or for them by another human being. Everyone else, on the other hand, received their gift, their power, by the laying on of the apostles' hands. And there's no apostles today, so no way to impart those gifts. And then third, their purpose was fulfilled. The purpose of miracles was to communicate and to confirm the message that had been preached. A strange guy comes into town, you've never seen him before, and he's preaching this new message about this resurrected man named Jesus. And how do I know I can believe him? How do I know that he is genuinely speaking for God? And so God enabled these men to be able to do things miraculously that would validate the fact that they were indeed speaking for God. Now, it was possible, and we see it in the New Testament, where some guy through sleight of hand is able to convince people that he's speaking for God. But God was doing things through these men to verify the fact that the message they preached was legitimate. We read of that in Hebrews 2, verse 3 and 4. After it was spoken through the Lord, it was confirmed to us by those who heard, God also bearing witness with them both by signs and wonders and by various miracles and by gifts of the Holy Spirit according to his own will. The purpose behind these spiritual gifts has now been satisfied. Those who are authorized spokesmen for God have written down what they received from God. It has been confirmed, and therefore there's no longer any need for us to have unusual evidence to prove that what I'm saying is indeed from God. We have God's book. We point to that. And therefore, when we talk about gifts this morning, we're not talking about the miraculous ones. We're talking about non-miraculous ones that continue today. That is, all of us have different gifts, abilities, talents that are to be used in the building up of the body of Christ. As Paul brings his body language imagery to a close here in chapter 12, he kind of summarizes much of what he has said prior to this. The truth of diversity, the need for unity, and a call to ministry. And as Paul moves forward, he again calls attention to the things that God has done, is continuing to do, that in order for the church to be effective, in order for it to be a vibrant church, it has to be working in concert with God's methods and his means and his motives. His teaching looks to reinforce the point that there is no gift that is common to all believers. No one has it. No one has an exclusive gift. No one has every gift. If the church is to survive and to thrive, if it is to be a vibrant church, the church has to understand the need for diversity and therefore the danger of uniformity. He describes that in verse 27. Now, previously in verse 17, he's already declared that without diversity, you don't have unity. What you have is uniformity, and uniformity results in the death of the body. I preached for 12 years at the Woodland Hills congregation in Marion, Indiana. And the main employer in Marion, Indiana is General Motors. They have a plant there, General Motors plant, and it's a stamping facility that makes body parts. Arms, legs, okay, not those kind of body parts. Doors and fenders, deck lids, okay? And on a number of occasions I was able to take a tour, and I would watch as this huge piece of sheet metal would go into a series of presses, and it would move from one press to the next, to the next, to the next. And when it came out on the other end, what you had was a hood for a 2025 Silverado pickup truck. And that hood was the exact replica of the one that came out before it and the one that will come out after it. That's uniformity. And Paul says the church isn't like that. Human beings are uniform, obviously, in some ways, but they are incredibly diverse in other ways. We have different heights, different weights, different hair color, different skin tone, different intellects, different abilities. And even within a single human body, it is not uniformity. It's not the sameness of function that produces unity. Instead, unity comes as a result of all of our parts obeying the one head. And that's the way the church is. The church is made up of different people, different backgrounds. We have different roles, different responsibilities, different talents for a reason. God made it that way on purpose so that we will have a greater impact on a much wider range of people. If we were all the same exactly in terms of how we think and all of that, we would reach one group of people, the people who are exactly like us. Instead, God made the church diverse so that somebody that I might not be able to reach because of my personality, you can reach because of yours, or because of my talent or ability, but because of your talent and ability. And throughout this section, or throughout previous sections, Paul makes it clear what diversity is not. Diversity is not competition among members. It's not inferiority where one member feels less significant than another, and it's not superiority where one member feels indispensable over the others. Instead, Paul says the body of Christ needs different functions and roles if it is to love and to grow and to live and to serve. And so instead of comparing ourselves to one another within the body is better served when each of us simply looks to fulfill our role within the body. And here's the reality. Your role may not be nearly as visible as other roles. Paul said it is still essential to the health of the body. The truth is, some of the most important things that are done in the service of God within this church are things that are unknown by the majority of people. Things that people do behind the scenes that nobody else knows about. There's no such thing as an ungifted Christian. And so we're not to be jealous of what somebody else has. We're not to be proud of the gifts that we have. We are simply to use those gifts for the building up of the body. And then Paul talks about God's accomplishments, or his appointments in verse 28. As God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, teachers, and miracles, and gifts, healings, helps, administrations, various kinds of tongues. Where does Paul put tongues? Where is it in the list? Dead last. What's the gift that all the Corinthians want? Tongues. Paul puts it dead last in his list. That was the spiritual gift that everybody in Corinth was wanting. That was the spiritual gift everyone was elevating. And Paul's going to discuss at length in chapter 14 that there are actually a lot of other gifts that are far more profitable to the church than tongues. And so here he lists apostles, okay, so that would be the original 12 minus Judas, add back in Matthias, and then Paul, one untimely born, men who were personally commissioned by Jesus, who traveled with Jesus, who spent time with Jesus, and in particular who saw the resurrected Jesus. And their delegated authority was unique. And then there's the prophets, and Paul's going to talk a lot in chapter 14 about the importance of this particular gift in regard to the edification of the church. When we think of prophecy, what do we typically think of? Telling the future, okay? Telling the future. What I found in my study is that when you go back and you look at the Old Testament prophets, there's certainly some of that. But overwhelmingly, what the majority of the prophets are telling is they are actually describing the present based on what God had said in the past. A prophet was saying, look, here's why we're experiencing this right now. It's because of what God said back here. They certainly did predict the future, but a lot of their work was just, hey, the reason why we's in the mess we's in is because God is keeping his promise that if we were faithless to him, these were some of the things that were going to happen. Teachers, men and women who explain and expound the word were heavily valued and respected then, and they are today as well. To enable Christians to mature and to grow up, you need teachers. Without feeding, sheep starve. And not just conveying information, but information from the Word of God that not only enters the mind, but it compels the will and the heart. Now, I want to focus on this next one. Helps. It's the only time this word's ever used in the New Testament. We don't know precisely what Paul has in mind. But it seems that what he's talking about, this is a general reference to practical assistance of all kinds. The root word means to take a burden on oneself instead of another. In other words, the idea of the root word, to helps, is diverting a burden off of somebody else's shoulders by putting it on my shoulders and helping to carry that load. And the list of helps would be almost endless. Cooking a meal, cleaning somebody's house, providing transportation, making repairs to their home, their car, visiting the sick, running errands, welcoming visitors to church. Thousands of simple tasks that are all performed for the benefit of the Lord and his body. Administrations is another odd one. When we think of that word, we tend to think of it in the wrong imagery. We think of some sort of an agency or a senior management position. The word actually describes someone who gives guidance, who gives direction, who provides wise counsel. The literal translation of the word here would be pilotings. And then in verse 29 and 30, Paul gives us a number of rhetorical questions. How many? Take a guess. It's in the Bible, right? How many? 7, right? Okay, you can look at it and you know it's not 3. You can look at it and think, it's probably not 10. Got to be that magic number 7. And it is. And through these questions, Paul drives the final nails into the coffin of the Corinthian self-sufficiency. All of these questions expect a negative response. And by these, Paul underscores the fact that not only are our gifts diverse, but no Christian is a recipient of every single gift, and therefore nobody is a nobody. I need other people, and those people need me. God knows that one member cannot supply every need within a body, that for the body to function, it requires the contribution of what every single member has to offer. And so what one member lacks, another one can provide. Where one is unable to function, another one can step up. 4 times in this chapter, Paul stresses the fact of God's involvement in wisdom. Look at verse 11. Chapter 12 and verse 11, but one and the same Spirit works all these things, distributing to each one individually, just as He wills. Verse 18, but now God has placed members, each one of them in the body, just as He desired. Verse 24, whereas our more presentable members have no need of it, but God has so composed the body, giving more abundant honor to that member which lacked. And then, of course, in verse 28, God has appointed the apostles, prophets, teachers, miracles, gifts, healings, etc., etc. Just as God made the human body, in which it requires the contribution of what every member of that body has, such is also true in the spiritual body. He made the human body so that no part could be considered inferior or useless, but He also made it so that no part could consider itself superior and indispensable. And that's exactly the way that He made the church. And therefore, our responsibility is simply to accept with gratitude where God placed us in the body. And with faithfulness, employ our talents to the benefit of the whole. Paul understood that if diversity is not kept under control, it destroys unity. It doesn't enhance it. And therefore, with all of the diversity that exists within the church, how could you actually achieve unity? And his answer is maturity. Maturity is what balances those two components. And so in verse 31, he says, but earnestly desire the greatest gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. Now keep in mind, Paul has rejected their approach as to what counts as a high status gift, striving after the gifts that they themselves have deemed to be the greatest. And so Paul clearly now here is not urging them to pursue the showier gifts. What he's trying to do is to get them to earnestly desire the greater gifts based on, hopefully, a transformation in their thinking based on what he has said throughout the chapter. What gifts are really the greatest gifts? Pursue those. And it's not the ones that cater to our status. And it's not the ones that pander to our selfish pursuits. The gifts that are the greater gifts are the ones that serve the greatest good of other people, that build up the entire body. And so what Paul has done, hopefully, in this chapter is he's redefined the terms in the minds of the Corinthians. He's not discouraging them to be eager for certain gifts, but hopefully he has changed their perspective in terms of the gifts that they should be looking to exercise. And of course, the more excellent way that he's talking about, you know that segues into that great chapter on the subject of love, that it is the one thing that is open to every single one of us. And when love controls and when love prevails in a church, then every member will be busy employing their particular gift, not for their own sake, but for the sake of everyone. What can I do that will bring benefit to the most amount of people as I use my gifts and abilities? All right. Your confusion is about to end. Got your little puzzle piece here? These little pieces of cardboard can communicate some amazing truths. And here's one of them. Every piece is different. By the way, yes, that is, if we were to put all of our pieces together, we still wouldn't have the picture. It's a 500-piece puzzle, okay? So if we were to put all 500 pieces together, that's the picture that you would get. Every piece is different. There are some that are similar, but there are none that are exactly the same. And that's true of us, isn't it? I mean, there are similarities. We all have eyes and ears and hands and feet, but we're different in terms of personality, and some of us are really different in terms of personality. We're different in terms of our DNA, our fingerprints. We all have different strengths and different weaknesses. We're just like these puzzle pieces. There's things that are alike, but there's a lot about each of us that's different. And then there's some that are more prominent. Are you a corner or an edge? Raise your hand. Look around. These are the special people. Jansen gave me a corner. I like it. There's only 4 of those in the whole box. When you try and put a puzzle together, where do you start? If you're like me, you find the corners, you find the edges. Why? It's a great starting, it is the starting point. Why? But why do we do that? All right, it frames the whole, but even before that, it's easy. It's easy. They stand out, right? It's easy to see an edge piece, and well, it's not a middle piece. It's easy to do that. And then, once you get that put together, now you've got a framework that you can start with. And that's an amazing thing. There's some that are more prominent. But I'm about to take you edge and corner pieces down a little bit. Every piece is of equal value to the puzzle, isn't it? In fact, if you have just one piece missing, you don't miss an edge piece nearly as much as you miss a piece right in the middle of it, one of those lowly middle pieces. Every piece has value. Understand, it's regardless of how you feel, you are vital to the health of this church. Without you, this church is not everything that it could or should be. Dizzy Dean, I don't know if we have any baseball fans here. Dizzy Dean was a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals back in the 1930s. He is the last National League pitcher to win 30 games. The last American League pitcher is. You can tell me afterwards if you know the answer to that question. Dizzy Dean, he took a line drive on his big toe, and it messed up his arm. Because what happened was he tried to come back too quickly. And so he started adjusting, because of the pain in his toe, how he came off of the pitching rubber. And it messed up his shoulder, and then it messed up his arm, and it ended his career. Because the body's all tied together. And so an injury to a big toe results in an injury to his arm, and it ends his career. Next. I would venture to say if you try and put your piece of the puzzle together with the person sitting next to you, it probably is not going to fit. The reality, it may well be that your piece for you folks up here actually fits somebody back there on the back corner. And yet, because you sit up here, if you're like at home, you kind of sit in and you kind of hang out in certain geographical regions of the building. The person that you would actually connect with the best is sitting there and you never talk to them and you don't know them. Over my years of preaching, there's been several times where people have come and they said, we just feel like we need to leave. We just don't feel like we fit. And I'm not gonna deny that may be how they feel. But it's been my experience that in most of those cases, it would be far more accurate to say they don't fit where and how they want to. They want to take their puzzle piece and they want to try and force it into something else. And it doesn't work. A number of years ago, I was having a conversation with one of the elders. He was a police officer, a police chief, and he sketched out on a Whataburger napkin what he had learned in this conference, and it was very applicable in terms of the church. And his point was, he said, look, it's not enough if I have the best officers all as individuals. That's not a good police department. They all have to be good and working together. And I thought that was a great analogy. And obviously, if you are a good Christian, you're going to be looking to blend together. So the analogy, like all analogies, breaks down at some point in time. But as you think about yourself in terms of the body here, if that's a church, that ain't a vibrant church. If we were to take all of these pieces of these puzzles and just spread them out on a table, you got nothing. Most churches are kind of like this. There are some people that you're really connected to, but the vast majority of people you're not. And I understand some of that. We connect by way of our, where we are in life and all of those kind, whether we have kids or whether you don't have kids, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're a widow or widower. I understand that part of things. But the question here is in terms of, who are you looking to fulfill your responsibilities to? Is it just a handful of people? Paul says that the thriving church, the strong church, the vibrant church is the one where everyone has the same care for one another. That's in chapter 12 and verse 25. And so who do you pray for? Who do you look to encourage? Who do you look to serve? Is it just a select group of people, or is it people within the body? Most of us, when we try to put a jigsaw puzzle together, what's the level of difficulty based on? The number of pieces and what the picture looks like, right? I mean, I've seen puzzles where it's all white. Those are for the freakish jigsaw puzzle people. That ain't me. The greater number of pieces, the more patience and the more perseverance it takes to get the picture right, to get all of the pieces together. I want you to think about it from the standpoint of your three elders here and what they're trying to accomplish here. They're trying to get all of these pieces, all of these different pieces to fit together and to work together to the glory of God and to the benefit of the kingdom. And it's a challenge because people aren't inanimate pieces of cardboard. We have ebbs and flows in life. We have good days, we have bad days. But it requires patience and perseverance. And so pray for them. Encourage them, as the Hebrew writer says, obey them and submit to them. Make their job a joy and not a burden. And then finally, I'm sorry. This is the other one. I'm messing up here. So we're connected to certain people. this is what we're striving for. Now, I realize, okay, not every dot connects to every dot here. I'm only going to go to a certain extent to make a point, okay? So you know what I meant to do here, okay? When all of those pieces are in the right spot, there's no one piece that's conspicuous. Even my nice, prominent corner piece. Each piece is important. A missing piece is very obvious, and it keeps the picture from being complete. But when you have every piece in the right place, they all blend together, and our individuality is concealed. We're functioning as a body. That, my friends, is a vibrant church. And so this morning, where are you in the puzzle? Are you a missing piece? Are you a disconnected piece? Are you an active and engaged piece? Are you looking to fit where you want to fit? Or are you content to fit where God puts you? Are you looking to stand out, or are you looking to blend in? Chapter 12, verse 12. We'll close with these passages. Chapter 12, verse 12, for even as the body is one, and yet has many members, and all the members of the body, though they are many, are one body, so also is Christ. Verse 14, for the body is not one member, but many. Verse 20, but now there are many members, but one body. Verse 27, now you are Christ's body and individually members of it. Friends, there is a place for everyone here. And when we are in our place and when we're fulfilling the role and the responsibility, when we're sharing the gifts that we have in the right way, you're going to have a vibrant church. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you. I'm going to give you an extra 5 minutes, I guess. So that works? Okay. All right. I mean, I can ramble on for another 6 minutes. Ain't nobody interested in that. All right. So you get a 20-minute break now. It's going to mess up the clock behind us, though. So thank y'all so much.